Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers Review the Week, where we bring you the best of the past 7 days. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be looking at the Occupy movement and whether it can lead to change. We also have a fierce debate over the fate of Libya 5 years after the fall of Gaddafi. We'll be asking if the Black Lives Matter movement really matters, a year after Freddie Gray's death in police custody. And we'll also have a look at how our documentary, The Newsmakers in North Korea, was made. 2011's Occupy movement came about as a response to social and economic inequality, the 1% against the rest. It spawned several imitators across Europe and further afield. But has it really made a difference? Sandra Gutman filed this report on Monday.
It started as a protest against a new labor law. On March 31st, hundreds of thousands of students and labor unionists marched against their socialist president, François Hollande, angry over new plans to create jobs by reducing protections for workers. But some of them still haven't gone home. In central Paris, protesters have been staging nightly sit-ins for weeks, creating a movement called Up All Night. In Place de la République, participants debate everything, from the migration crisis to climate change and tax evasion.
The aim here and everywhere in France, just like in other countries such as Greece, Spain, Italy, or even Canada, when they held a general strike in 2014, is to rebel against the powerful and scare them. We want fear to switch sides.
It's taken on a revolutionary feel, and sit-ins have spread across France. So is Nuit Debout the start of a new political movement, or have we seen it all before? (2011) Wall Street, New York. A movement against social and economic inequality was born. Protesters, fed up with capitalism, occupied the city to take a stand against corporations and the super rich. The message gathered pace across America and spread to more than 82 countries around the world. But the movement hasn't succeeded in toppling capitalism. What it did do was spawn other anti-establishment groups. In Europe, a crippling debt crisis launched a wave of protests against job cuts and austerity drives. The Indignados in Spain led the way. In Hong Kong, the so-called Umbrella Revolution directed its anger to Beijing not to meddle in its affairs. But like their tents, these movements have largely been packed away. Critics argue most protests lacked a coherent message. But participants say a display of dissatisfaction was enough to raise eyebrows and enter politics. Social justice parties have recently become players in mainstream politics. In 2014, Greece's Syriza party rose from being a protest movement to winning a general election. Catalonia's anti-austerity Podemos party is now the third largest political contender in Spain. Whatever their politics, these former fringe parties are answering calls for new voices in power, a sentiment that some argue started in Wall Street. It raises the question, had it not been for these social revolutions, would a former trade unionist like Jeremy Corbyn have emerged as the UK's Labour Party leader? Or would a vocal critic of corporate greed like Bernie Sanders have become a frontrunner to lead the most powerful capitalist country in the world? Sandra Gutman, The Newsmakers.
On Monday, I spoke to Nick Vonneker, a correspondent for Politico in Paris, and Michael Leviton, editor of Occupy.com. I started by asking Michael whether Bernie Sanders was the candidate Occupy protesters have been waiting for.
I think it's pretty hard to deny that. I think you cannot look at Bernie Sanders' platform, his core arguments, his language, his vocabulary itself. It emerged precisely out of the Occupy. I mean, Bernie has been a left, an independent, and a socialist, politician now for decades. But his language, the fact that it's resonating the way it is, the fact that people have opened their ears. What Occupy did, it changed the conversation. That is what the establishment was able to say about it. But it really created this new vocabulary. And Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, who really is the carrier of the Democratic Party now in the Senate, they are speaking the language really of the 99%. They're saying rein in their banks. They're saying make the connections between how Wall Street is governing Washington, essentially, hiring our, paying for our legislators, paying for our legislation.
Point well made, Michael.
So I think Bernie absolutely.
Sure. Yes. Sorry to interrupt you. Final comment from Nicholas. I want to ask him inversely, is the same thing happening on the right? Maybe we had the Tea Party 5 years ago and we have Trump now and a wave of right-wing movements throughout Europe as well. Is the same phenomenon happening in the mirror image as well, Nicholas? Final answer, please. Less than 30 seconds.
I think it's easy to get too abstract when answering this type of question. But yes, indisputably, there is the anti-establishment movements on the right and on the left are joined together by a suspicion of globalization and a loss of reference points in the world, and there people react in different ways. On the left, there's a reaction against banks, against the establishment. On the right, there's an isolationist instinct and suspicion of outsiders. But these are similar phenomena, and I think they react to feelings of alienation and fear about the future. And that's something that leaders have to address in the United States and in France to make sure that the most populist, the most extreme political movements don't come into power.
A year ago in Baltimore, Freddie Gray was arrested by police after running away from them. A week later, he was dead, having suffered fatal injuries on his way to central booking. He was one of a number of unarmed black males to die at the hands of the police, prompting weeks of sometimes violent protests in Baltimore and across the U.S. Soraya Lenny had this report on Tuesday, the anniversary of his death.
One year ago, a 25-year-old Baltimore man died in hospital. How he got there began a week earlier. That day was like many others outside the Gilmore Homes project, another arrest in a high-crime area. But this time, things turned out different. The man police arrested was Freddie Gray, and 30 minutes later, he was in a coma. A week later, he was dead. All of it happened while police were under intense scrutiny. It was at the height of the civil rights movement Black Lives Matter. According to police, it happened this way. They spotted Gray walking down the street, and when he saw them, he ran. They caught and searched him and found an illegal knife. He resisted arrest, but the officers managed to put him in the back of a police van. Inside, he threw himself against the walls and caused his own injuries, which later proved fatal. But this is what the state says.
The findings of our comprehensive, thorough, and independent investigation, coupled with the medical examiner's determination that Mr. Gray's death was a homicide, which we received today, has led us to believe that we have probable cause to file criminal charges.
According to the medical examiner, Gray died from a spinal injury caused when he slammed into the back of the police transport van. 5 of the 6 officers involved are still facing trial.
Black lives matters because you're killing black people.
Gray's death came almost 2 years after the launch of the Black Lives Matter movement.
It is absolutely vital that the truth comes out on what happened to Mr. Freddie Gray.
The movement began after the acquittal of Neighborhood Watch coordinator George Zimmerman, who shot dead unarmed black teenager Trayvon Martin in Florida in 2012, and also followed the deaths of several other black men and the acquittal of those involved. It turned what had been a community debate into a national one. Many minority groups said the public needed to be more aware of what had happened.
Let's don't kid ourselves. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for video cameras. Instead of one cover-up behind that blue wall, after another cover-up behind that blue wall, and one lie after another lie, now we see the truth.
But although politicians promised change, was there any?
We're here because we feel threatened. All of our sons are at risk. The number's not been called on yet. There's too much killing, too much hatred, too much violence, too much fear.
Soraya Lenny, the Newsmakers.
On Tuesday, I spoke to Christopher Harris, the executive director of Unhyphenated America. Here's his response when I asked him if there was a pattern behind the killing of unarmed black males by police.
Well, you know, Imran, if you look at the grand scheme of things, I believe in bringing a broader perspective. If you look at the number of deaths in the black community from homicides, I mean, between the time of a Freddie Gray and a Mike Brown, there were easily 1,000 young black males who died at the hands of other black males. And nobody knows their names. That's what, listen, the death of Tamir Rice, that's a tragedy, okay? The death of these individuals, all of these lives matter. This is what we should be promoting. All these lives matter, but the majority of things that we can control ourselves within our own communities. And I'd like to point out a great story that, you know, people want to talk about what's the aftermath of Freddie Gray. The great story is Miss Toya Graham and her son, Michael Singleton. That's the great story. That's somebody who decided, hey, I don't want this for my son. And she took control of her son. You might not know the name off the top of your head.
Sure, no,
but
she gave him a couple slaps. No, we do know, of course. No, she gave him a couple slaps and he was protesting and she pulled him out of the protest. Yes. Granted, I want to ask you again, you say all lives matter. From the perspective of the cops, can you honestly say that across the country, according to the vast majority of policemen in the country, to them, all lives matter? Well,
here's one thing you might not know about me. I'm the son of a career law enforcement officer. My father was a special agent in the Air Force for 25 years, or just over 20 years, almost 25 years. And then he served another 12 years as a deputy sheriff. I've done ride-alongs with other police officers who were also black, you know. And so, yes, they will tell you those lives do matter. But also cops want to go home at night. I can tell you, I always wanted my father to come home safely at night. And when you do a ride-along, you see the sort of things that police officers see. So do black lives matter? Well, police officers, to them, all lives matter. That they will go out of their way to save your life. They'll put their life in danger to save your life.
It's been 5 years since Libya's revolution. An assortment of rebel groups routed Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's forces in 6 months of fighting with the help of Western airstrikes. But while the revolution may be over, the fighting is not. Libya has endured half a decade of chaos, rival militias, competing governments, and Daesh all battling for control. And now a new unity government has the unenviable task of putting the country back together. On Wednesday, Randolph Nogel sent this report.
Violence, destruction, and lawlessness. Years of fighting in Libya have made the country one of the most unstable in the world. But Libya's state of chaos was not what Western leaders had in mind when they helped depose the regime of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi.
After 42 years, Colonel Gaddafi's rule of fear has come to an end.
The last major regime strongholds have fallen.
Maintenant, c'est aux Libyens de tourner la page des années terribles de M. Gaddafi.
As part of the Arab Spring, the Libyan revolution brought hope for regime change. But on the streets of Benghazi today, the rewards of that struggle have yet to be seen. Libya has no central government, and the fighting hasn't stopped, leading many to question whether getting rid of Gaddafi was the right move. To some, Gaddafi was a liberator. To others, a tyrannical dictator. After decades of tension with the West, he became a partner and a big supplier of oil. But when demonstrations broke out in 2011, Gaddafi once again became the enemy. NATO-led airstrikes supported rebels in their fight against Gaddafi forces and helped them conquer the country. But since then, a civil war has broken out, fragmenting Libya, fought over by several rival governments. The General National Congress in the capital, while the House of Representatives governs the far eastern city of Tobruk. But international efforts are now geared towards legitimizing a third unity government in Tripoli. Foreign diplomats have been flocking to Libya to get others to back it. And the US has even threatened to take action against those who refuse to support the new government. The chaos of a post-Gaddafi Libya has generated some nostalgia for stability under his regime. Supporters credit him with developing unrivaled healthcare and education systems. They blame lawlessness for the advances of Daesh and other armed groups in the country, and point to Libya becoming a springboard for refugees heading to Europe. The international community is pinning its hopes on the new unity government finally rebuilding Libya. The question is whether any agreement can swiftly change the politics of old. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
On Wednesday, I was joined by award-winning journalist and Libya analyst Mustafa Fetouri and Dr. Ahmed Sawahli, a former health official for Libya's National Transitional Council. They disagreed on many points, not least on what Libya had achieved by toppling Gaddafi.
5 years after the revolution, if people come, historians in 100 years' time will look at what's happened after the revolution. They're not going to look at the first 5 years. That is no time at all. It's like saying, why is a 5-year-old not done a PhD or not become an engineer? They're only 5. So I think we need to be given a chance. Hopefully, the whole international community will come and help Libyans properly this time.
How much more time, Mr. Ahmed, do you suggest? How much more time? How much more time do you suggest? 20 years?
I'll tell you, as upsetting as it is, after the American Civil War, look how many years it took for America to become America. After the French Revolution, look at the bloodbath, which, thank God it didn't happen in Libya.
But my friend, this has not been a revolution. It's not a revolution. It has not been a revolution in Libya. It's something else. No, of course not. It's not. It's something else.
What is it, Mustafa? Mustafa, what is it?
Well, it is. Let me explain to you something. What has happened in 2011, if you want to call it a revolution, it does not fit the definition of revolution. What has happened, and to my understanding, and the majority of people's understanding, is that the interests, if we could say, the interest of a small section of the Libyan society coincided in a very rare moment of history with the interests of superpowers, foreign powers who have been very angry with Gaddafi for over so many years, and at that moment they decided to get rid of the guy just for that, without any idea what will happen to Libya.
It's the world's most closed country. Over the past few decades, very few foreigners and even fewer journalists have gained access to North Korea. But last week, I was invited to visit the so-called Hermit Kingdom to take part in the Pyongyang Marathon and be shown the city's tourist sites. This is a taste of what I saw. Suspicious of the world, the Hermit Kingdom walls itself in. But proud of its achievements, it builds monuments that reach for the skies. I thought North Korea would be one place where I'd finally feel tall, but the statues and monuments here are enough to dwarf anyone. Piercing the Pyongyang skyline and standing nearly 200 meters tall, this is the Juche Tower, the ultimate expression of North Korean beliefs. At the base of this mammoth Juche Tower is a poem dedicated to Kim Il-sung for his 70th birthday in 1982. The fifth stanza of this poem reads, "Man is the master of everything, and he decides everything, and decides his own destiny," which emphasizes the Juche need and emphasis on complete and absolute self-reliance. My My next stop is Pyongyang's latest tourist attraction, the shooting range. In a militarized society, being a good marksman helps. I've never shot a gun before, but I was keen to test my skills against North Korea's finest shooters. And it seems the country's top marksman is none other than Supreme Leader Marshal Kim Jong-un. So these two marks, Marshal Kim Jong-un, did he come to this? He came to this place. Yeah, he came over here. He hit the bullseye with 2 bullets.
No, he shot 2 bullets.
Oh, 2 bullets?
2 bullets. Kind of, you know, what do you call it?
Ricochet.
Yeah, ricochet.
Oh, so he hit the bullseye and it ricocheted from the inside. Right here. I'm gonna try and get the exact number. Sadly, on the evidence of my target shooting, I'd better not give up the day job. Way off. Okay, just a warm up. Off. My eyes are terrible. I need my glasses. Down. Okay, I suck. This is very embarrassing. Terrible eyesight. No, I've missed all of them. Oh, what a shame. I'm clearly nowhere near the league of Marshal Kim Jong-un. On Thursday, I spoke with the producer-director of our documentary, Newsmakers in North Korea, Jerome Evans, about the difficulties we had filming in the country.
Filmmaking is really about control, about being able to control your environment. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say I've never been in a situation where we had such complete and utter lack of any kind of control of what we were doing, where we were going next, whether we were allowed to film it or not, how long we'd be allowed to film it for. I mean, in a few cases, only a few seconds. The information was really not forthcoming at any point on the trip. And so it became like this kind of, you know, kaleidoscopic sort of roller coaster ride where one minute you'd be seeing these mass dance-offs like you can see in the wall behind you, and the next minute you're sort of you know, sort of testing your marksmanship against Kim Jong-un as you did indeed.
Yeah. The marathon, we expected to have full access in terms of you being with me on the course, and then surprise, surprise, we're told you can't film on the course, so I'm filming with this tiny little camera while I run.
You did a very good job, by the way.
I didn't do too badly. It was better than my running. And then, so you don't exactly know where I am, and you have this additional challenge at the last minute of having to cover the marathon without being given proper access to the marathon. How did that work for you?
It was tricky. I mean, one thing I would say about the marathon is that moment when we kind of came out into the stadium and there were 20,000 people just sort of cheering and all, you know, immaculately dressed, every seat full in the stadium. I mean, that was a real hairs on the back of your neck moment. That was quite a highlight. But then, as you say, everything went a little bit south. And so we weren't allowed bags in the marathon either. So the minders were kind of trailing behind me, all sort of grabbing cameras and tripods.
Yeah, but you got the minder to carry your tripod for you, so...
Yeah, I mean, they were very accommodating, really. I mean, I think I really liked those guys, to be honest.
Yeah,
and I think that perhaps the real orders were coming from elsewhere, and they were changing from moment to moment, as you said.
In our picture this of the week, we have the sky at night, but from a completely different angle. NASA has released video of the northern and southern lights filmed by astronauts on board the International Space Station. Let's take a look. Well, that was the week that was. A week when we looked at the Occupy and Black Lives Matter movements in the US and asked what they've achieved. A week where we analyzed Libya's unraveling after Gaddafi, and the week when we went to North Korea. Next week, we're looking at malaria and if there's more the world can do to prevent it. We'll also be looking at the Chernobyl nuclear disaster 30 years on and asking if the Eurozone is heading for another crisis. You've been watching the Newsmakers Review the Week with me, Imran Garta. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye-bye.